Welcome to the Road to Continuous Improvement, Sustaining an MTSS Framework, Part 3, Organizational Drivers for Database Decision Making. My name is Sarah Gentry, and I'm the Region 5 Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Learning Specialist for Nebraska MTSS. The Nebraska MTSS team is excited to welcome you to our webinar series to guide and support the implementation of critical components of an MTSS framework for continuous improvement. The series will directly align with the NEMTSS framework document and will consist of 4 parts: the NEMTSS teaming structure, leadership drivers, organization drivers for database decision making, and competency drivers for staff support. Each of the 4 parts of the series will have a video that can be watched continuously or navigated around to only watch specific chapters. Each video starts with an introduction of the topic, and then we'll have 3 to 7 chapters, depending on the part of the series it is. One way to access these chapters is before you go into full screen, hover over the status bar, and then click on the word Introduction to see a list of chapters to the right of the video. Chapters replace the ads to the right of the video. Click the chapter you would like to see from the list, and the video will automatically skip ahead to that chapter. Another way to see the different chapters, especially if you're in full screen mode, is to hover your mouse over the status bar at the bottom of the video. A white graph will appear that shows you where each chapter starts and stops. Click your mouse to skip to wherever you would like to go in the video. In this chapter, we will be providing a short introduction to organization drivers. In this introduction, we will define organization drivers as an essential component for implementation, connect database decision-making to the other essential elements within the NEMTSS framework, and recognize the connectivity of organization drivers, more specifically database decision-making, to continuous improvement. In this first section, we will discuss what organization drivers are, but first we need to understand organization drivers as a part of a larger system and start with some common language. Implementation drivers are key components of capacity and infrastructure that influence a program's success. They are the core components needed to initiate and support classroom, building, and district-level change. Drivers are the common features of successful supports needed to make full and effective use of innovations that will benefit students and their families. The National Implementation Research Network, or NIRN, says that all drivers should be integrated rather than siloed. Their definition of integration is, it means that the philosophy, goals, knowledge, and skills related to the program or practice are consistently and thoughtfully expressed in each of the implementation drivers. In this model, we will identify 3 implementation drivers: competency drivers, leadership drivers, and organizational drivers. In this webinar, our focus will be on organization drivers. Organization drivers are defined as mechanisms to create and sustain hospitable organizational and system environments for effective services. Organization drivers include fidelity, system implementation, facilitative administration, and database decision-making. The first of the organization drivers that we will discuss is systems implementation. The purpose of the systems implementation driver is to assist in creating a supportive context so effective services can be provided, maintained, and improve over the years. Systems implementation looks at our collaborative partnerships intended to secure resources. It focuses on reducing potential barriers by engaging external systems. External systems are any organizations that can have an impact on districts. The Nebraska Department of Education, NDE, and the U.S. Department of Ed are some examples of external systems. Some barriers from those could be compliance mandates and not funding those mandates fully. These are not necessarily bad barriers, but they can be barriers nonetheless. Another external system could be companies that sell programs but do not have the capacity to provide quality professional learning to implement those programs, leading to potential systemic concerns of not being able to implement programs with fidelity. And finally, systems implementation concentrates on developing policies and communication systems to ensure that aligned supports are sustainable. In facilitative administration, we are thinking about making adaptations to roles, functions, and systems based on need. We consider the use of data to address our challenges and develop a system that facilitates clear communication. Policy development is also essential to supporting the work. The final organization driver we will review is database decision-making. The importance of using data-driven methods to making decisions at all levels within our schools is highlighted within the NEMTSS essential elements, which includes database decision-making as one of its 4 elements. The database decision-making includes using multiple sources of data and a balanced assessment system. It recognizes that when considering data sources, we must ensure that the data we are using are reliable, reported, and embedded within our routines. The data also must be accessible and be used within the decision-making process. In order to facilitate best practices, NEMTSS recognizes that we need to utilize a balanced assessment system. According to Bernhardt, multiple measures of data would include demographic, perceptual, school process, and student learning data. By collecting and reviewing these multiple measures of data collectively, schools are able to make informed decisions that best meet the needs of their students, staff, and the district overall. The Nebraska MTSS problem-solving model consists of 5 steps as indicated in the graphic above. These 5 steps are all important, but they are not linear, and leadership might go back and forth between the steps as needed. The problem-solving model can be used in making decisions at the individual student level and on larger scales, such as district decision-making. Each of the steps, data collected through the balanced assessment system, are essential to making informed decisions. Now we will talk about the connections to the NEMTSS essential elements. As I mentioned prior in this webinar, database decision-making is one of the 4 essential elements that the NEMTSS team has identified for building a sustainable MTSS framework. As we continue, we will dive deeper into how database decision-making fits into this model and how it intersects with the other essential elements. Building a sound infrastructure and developing shared leadership is integral because supporting effective teams builds the infrastructure for implementation and is the foundation on which other work depends so teams can effectively and efficiently make database decisions. The layered continuum of support is an essential element that helps educators illustrate database processes needed to support all learners. Teams utilize data to determine if 80% or more of students are meeting benchmark criteria established by universal screening tools at Tier 1 core, identify targeted supports for some learners, and intensified supports for individual learners. Database decision-making is often considered the heart of the NEMTSS framework, as this element is vital to the development and processes of each of the other systems elements. Database decision-making is described as the design of a balanced assessment system to provide data to inform reflection and decision-making. It guides teams on how to use data to influence decisions for individual students and groups of students, and it drives continuous improvement. Communication and collaboration requires dedicated focus and must explicitly be infused throughout every essential element in order to support the system overall. A well-documented communication plan can serve as data to determine effectiveness and facilitate opportunities to identify areas for growth. Now we're going to shift into identifying the connection between database decision-making and the continuous improvement process. We all know that the continuous improvement process is ongoing. This process allows districts to use data to guide all educators to ensure each and every student has access to learning opportunities that enhance their educational outcomes. NEMTSS and the Nebraska Department of Education teamed up to co-create the Continuous Improvement Plan Template, SIP template. This is a resource districts and schools can use as they gather information and data to reflect on and make database decisions. There's not a requirement to use this template. However, it can serve as a resource that can be edited to meet your needs for compliance with Rule 10. These components are highlighted in the table of contents in this document. If your team is interested in using the NEMTSS Continuous Improvement Template, please reach out to your regional support lead and obtain a copy. We've now defined organization drivers for database decision-making and connected them to the NEMTSS essential elements. We took a deeper dive into database decision-making as part of the ongoing continuous improvement process. For more information on how district teams use database decision-making and engage community partners and families and caregivers in the decision-making process, please click on the respective chapter tab. If you have any further questions or in need of support, please visit the NEMTSS website at nemtss.unl.edu, where you can find the information needed to contact your regional support lead. Thank you, and we hope you have a great day.
Hello, and welcome to the webinar on the district's use of the CIP template. The focus for this webinar will be an introduction to a district team's use of the Continuous Improvement Plan template. Additionally, we will identify the thread of the Nebraska MTSS essential elements as we look at the CIP template. The framework of a multi-tiered system of support is built around 4 essential elements, all of which are present in the Continuous Improvement Plan. These are infrastructure and shared leadership, communication and collaboration, layered continuum of support, and database decision-making. Rule 10 provides regulations and procedures that ensure equality of educational opportunities for all students in public elementary and secondary schools. The bulleted items on the right are examples of evidence districts must have in place to meet Rule 10, which are all key components of the Nebraska MTSS essential elements. Therefore, they work hand in hand. The Nebraska MTSS essential elements help districts put systems in place that also meet Rule 10. This is a screenshot of the table of contents for the CIP template. Please note that the requirements of Rule 10 are identified in purple below the headings. Additionally, you will notice in the table of contents, there is designated areas to add data from the district, preschool, elementary, middle, and secondary collections. Sound infrastructure and effective shared leadership are the foundation on which all other essential elements are built. Laying the foundation of strong infrastructure and shared leadership in Nebraska MTSS requires attention to 5 components. Number 1, the core beliefs and norms. Number 2, team structures and routines. Number 3, clarity of roles and database decision-making. Number 4, professional learning. And number 5, the continuous improvement action planning. As we build the infrastructure in the template, we will first add the district's mission and vision statements. Additionally, you can add the core beliefs and norms for the meeting times that you'll have together. In this table, the problem-solving model has an image placeholder for the Nebraska MTSS problem-solving model. If your district has adopted your own, please insert that here. From there, we have a space to document each of the district's teaming structures and including team members' names, positions, roles, and responsibilities. The CIP template has tables to record this information for each of the district's identified teams. Creating a professional learning plan that builds the capacity of the adults so all can confidently carry out the implementation plan to help reach the goals set is essential. Document the priority areas, intended participants, topics, responsible persons, resources needed, dates to engage, and implementation dates in the CIP template. This plan can be shared with ESUs and the Nebraska MTSS team to coordinate professional learning and support. The next element addressed in the CIP template is layered continuum of support. This is where we document the content area standards, curriculum, instructional materials, assessments, and evidence-based instructional methods that work together to support all students in a whole child approach. In the first table, we document the instructional methods used at each grade level, which helps illustrate the processes needed to support all learners. These instructional methods may be identified through the district's instructional model. The team may also review the evidence-based practices prioritized in the district's targeted improvement plan if those methods would support all students. In addition to the instructional methods, we document the evidence-based practices, high-quality instructional materials, and curriculum used at each level. Notice in this table that these are documented for our core Tier 1 practices and materials, as well as those used for Tiers 2 and 3. This planning and documentation is essential to support the fidelity of our layered continuum of supports and allows the analysis of the scope and sequence of supports at each level. We document our evidence-based practices, high-quality materials, and curriculum for social, emotional, behavioral, and academic supports at all levels, PK through 12. The third Nebraska MTSS essential element, evident in the CIP template, is database decision-making. Database decision-making, which includes the design of a well-balanced assessment system to provide data to inform reflection and decision-making. It is the heart of Nebraska MTSS and guides teams on how to use data to influence decisions for individual students and groups of students and to drive continuous improvement. This is yet another critical component in meeting Rule 10 expectations of data analysis and the selection of at least one goal related to academic achievement. In the template, the first responsibility of the team is to discuss and document a balanced assessment plan. Ensure at this time that we are documenting the assessment used, the type of assessment, for example, summative, interim, diagnostic, or universal screener. Additionally, we consider the frequency of the assessment and the purpose. The purpose of the assessment lends itself to excellent conversations around the usage of each assessment's results in data-based decision-making. We document these assessments for preschool through 12th grades in ELA, math, and SEBL. As well as the balanced assessment plan, we gather many other forms of data, both from students and adults. All of these forms of data create a comprehensive picture that facilitates discussions in the planning of actions for progress and improvement. Utilizing a problem-solving process for database decision-making will guide community and PK through 12 district action planning in a succinct and systematic process, which will drive continuous improvement efforts. The Nebraska CIP template is a resource tool to help document and guide the action planning process. In this action planning process, we use our wealth of data to identify factual data points. We conduct a root cause analysis of the data points that lead us to priority outcomes and goals. The fourth essential element addressed in the template is a plan for team communication and collaboration. It is vital that the team consider the following throughout the continuous improvement process. To do that, they may ask these questions. Do we have evidence of student voice and engagement throughout the process? How are we engaging our families and caregivers in our teams and decision making? Additionally, how are we partnering with our community in areas that benefit the community and the district? Finally, for student, family, and community, how are we communicating the district team's work in a consistent manner? The CIP template has a table where the communication plan can be documented and is broken down by stakeholder group, information type, frequency, format by which it is shared, and finally, who is responsible for communicating the information. Through this webinar, you have been introduced to a district team's use of the CIP template. Additionally, we have seen the integration of the Nebraska MTSS essential elements in the CIP template as districts not only work towards continuous improvement, but also effectively build multi-tiered systems of support. We now move on to community and PK-12 district action planning using the problem-solving model. My name is Nicole Long, and for this chapter, we will focus on the following objectives as they relate to the PK-12 district action planning. We will demonstrate how to utilize the Nebraska MTSS problem-solving model in district action planning and identify professional learning aligned with the goals and priorities. To view a webinar for the PK-12 district and/or family involvement and engagement within database decision-making in the Nebraska MTSS Framework, please click on the respective chapter tab. Utilizing a problem-solving process for database decision-making will guide community and PK-12 district action planning in a succinct and systematic process, which will drive continuous improvement efforts. The Nebraska MTSS CIP template is a resource tool to help document and guide the action planning process. When determining what is occurring, according to Bernhardt, multiple measures in relation to both student and adult data are considered to allow district teams to ensure the needs of both adults and students are being considered and utilized, which leads to quality continuous improvement. This includes identifying factual data points from student demographics, such as attendance and ethnicity, student learning data, such as standardized tests and teacher observations, student and adult perceptions, such as surveys, for example, the Nebraska MTSS Self-Assessment Survey or the Comprehensive Needs Assessment, and school process data, such as descriptions of school programs and processes. Multiple measures of data tell the whole story and help a district team understand a school's impact on student achievement. The first step in the action planning process is to identify the problem, including areas of strengths and areas of growth. Keep in mind that according to Rule 10, one continuous improvement goal must be academic, so that is a good place to start. This is a screenshot taken from the Nebraska CIP template and is where a team can document this step of the problem-solving process. You will see a screenshot of different sections of the CIP template throughout the rest of the problem-solving process to indicate where to document each step. After identifying the strengths and areas of growth, the team creates a precise problem statement that clearly describes the problem to be solved in simple terms. It's typically focused on student learning and informed by the multiple data sources mentioned earlier. An example of a precise problem statement is: students with disabilities are underperforming in ELA compared to their peers. In step 2 of the problem-solving model, teams start to analyze and ask, why do we believe this is occurring? Teams go through a process of determining what symptoms are showing on the surface, what the problem might be, and finally, determine the root cause to understand what is driving the gap. Some questions teams may ask include: what data do we need to better understand what is driving this discrepancy? And what does the data tell us about what is the root cause for not attaining the desired outcome? Conduct a root cause analysis of your problem statement to identify your problem of practice. A root cause will be something that the team can influence and control. To know the end of this process has been reached, everyone on the team needs to agree that it is the root cause, and it should be logical and provide clarity to the problem that was identified in the first step. Finally, if the cause were to be dissolved, ask yourself if there is realistic hope that the problem can be reduced or even prevented in the future. The Nebraska MTSS CIP template has a place to document a team's process through the root cause analysis. Trust the process and stay focused on things that can be influenced and within one's locus of control. Remember, the root cause has been reached when everyone on the team agrees, it's logical, and provides clarity to the precise problem statement that was created during the identify step. Lastly, remember to ask if there is realistic hope that the problem can be reduced or even prevented in the future. Teams are now ready to start planning and address the prioritized gap, which includes starting to think about what professional learning is needed to support the team in the plan. Setting the direction and focus starts with creating the priority, outcome, and goal to achieve. Set a priority goal based on data that, if reached, the root cause of the precise problem statement will be eliminated. Ensure all existing district plans, focus areas, and/or initiatives are embedded and represented within the CIP goals to create coherence and sustainability. The fourth step in the precise problem-solving process is implement, where the team will focus on following through with the plan to improve areas of need by identifying resources, staff involved, a timeline, and professional learning opportunities needed for staff. In the CIP template, document the actions needed to be taken, staff responsible for taking action, resources needed to implement, and a timeline. Creating a professional learning plan that builds the capacity of the adults so that all can confidently carry out the implementation plan to help reach the goals set is essential. Document the priority areas, intended participants, topics, responsible persons, resources needed, dates to engage, and implementation dates in the CIP template. This plan can be shared with ESUs and the Nebraska MTSS team to coordinate professional learning and support. Lastly, teams reflect on the plan to determine the effectiveness of the action plan and adjust as needed. Some questions that may be beneficial for this step include: what impact did the action we took have on the context of what we were targeting? How do we know and how do we share what we have learned? All of these steps in the problem-solving process is with the focus of how can we improve the system to support better outcomes for all students. It is important to remember the process does not stop here. Based on the data gathered and discussions held, the team will then loop back to identify and begin the cycle again. Teams will reflect on progress toward action steps regularly throughout the year. However, decide on a minimum of 4 dates to formally commit to reflect on the progress, which will include providing evidence or data that demonstrates the progress and determining if adjustments need to be made or continue as they are because they are meeting with success. The problem-solving process provides a structure for teams to work together to identify, analyze, plan, implement, and reflect in a cyclical process, and it is always providing new insights to continue to help adults learn and grow, so we can all continue to do better when we know better. We have now discussed how to utilize the Nebraska MTSS problem-solving model in district action planning that includes identifying professional learning that is aligned with goals and priorities. To view a webinar for a PK-12 district and/or family involvement and engagement within database decision-making in the Nebraska MTSS Framework, please click on the respective chapter tab.
In this chapter, we will recognize the value of family and caregiver engagement in the continuous improvement process and identify the roles of family and caregivers on the district level decision-making team. We will begin by looking at the value of family and caregiver engagement. Jane D. Hall, a former educator and governor of Arizona, said, "At the end of the day, the most overwhelming key to a child's success is the positive involvement of the parents." We felt that this quote was a great way to begin our chapter on family and caregiver engagement. A wide body of evidence emphasizes the importance of family engagement for student achievement and social development over time and makes a strong case that engagement can be a powerful strategy for sustainable long-term student success. Research shows a variety of links between effective family engagement and student success. Teacher-family communication is linked to better homework completion, attention during instructional tasks, and class participation rates, as well as improved teacher-student interactions and student motivation. Students whose families are involved in their school experiences are more likely to have higher grades and test scores, attend school regularly, have better social skills, show improved behavior, and adapt well to school. School-based family engagement activities have been shown to have a positive effect on student outcomes overall. And students whose families who help them make the connection between their current school performance and their long-term goals, such as attending college or working in a specific profession, is correlated with higher achievement levels for those students in secondary school. While we recognize the importance of engaging family members in our schools and the overall benefits for students, it's also important to recognize that there are several common barriers. While creating a plan for family and caregiver engagement, districts should consider these barriers and make accommodations to provide equitable opportunities for family and caregivers. Now we will discuss the role of family and caregivers in the database decision-making process. The strength of the Nebraska MTSS framework comes from effectively engaging a variety of voices and perspectives to identify supports students need. To do that, teams need to be set up effectively and be able to work together. Through a multi-tiered system of support, teams are established to analyze data, identify strengths and areas for improvement, and develop an action plan for growth. Student support teams encourage family and caregiver engagement in identifying intensified supports on multiple data sources. Collaborative and school leadership teams may benefit from obtaining specific data from family members and/or caregivers to review for school improvement. District teams are encouraged to include family members and caregivers as partners in decision-making at a district level. The purpose of the district team includes, but is not limited to, leading continuous improvement for the district, using data to design and adjust the district system to ensure the success of each and every student, elevating the student, the caregiver, and staff voices, and connecting their work directly to the district's strategic goals. It's important to ensure the purpose of the team is clarified for all team members, as well as stakeholders, including staff, family, or caregivers, and community members. While family members and caregivers are essential members of the district leadership team, it's important to note that they do not have to be involved in every district leadership meeting. It's important for district leadership to define the roles of family members on the team and identify the meetings and meeting agendas that are relevant for the family members and caregivers. It's also important that the district recognizes the data that are appropriate for family members to have access to. At no point should a family member serving on a district leadership team have access to student-specific data. Previously, we discussed several common barriers for engaging families within our school districts. The National Parent Teacher Association has identified the following standards for developing family-school partnerships. These standards can serve as a guide for districts to eliminate barriers that prevent or influence family members and caregivers from engaging in their students' education. These include welcoming all families, effectively communicating, supporting student success, speaking up for every child, sharing power, and collaborating within the community. In this chapter, we've recognized the value of family and caregiver engagement in the continuous improvement process and identified the roles of family and caregivers on district level decision-making teams. For more information on how district teams use data-based decision-making and engage community partners, and how pre-K through 12 schools use data to drive continuous improvement, please click on the respective chapter.
Greetings, my name is Kayla Payton and I'm the Regional Support Lead for Nebraska MTSS Region 2. For this chapter, we will focus on the following objectives as they relate to school teams. We will provide an example of how a school leadership team may use the CIP template. We will identify the presence of each NEMTSS essential element at the school level, and we will utilize a problem-solving model at the school level to create or refine goals for continuous improvement. In the previous Road to Continuous Improvement webinar, we gave an introduction and overview of the Continuous Improvement template. The CIP template houses essential information for organizing at the systems level, as well as data necessary to engage in the problem-solving process. For the purpose of this webinar, we will explore how school teams would utilize the various pieces of the Continuous Improvement Plan template to engage in database problem-solving and decision-making, or to create or refine goals for continuous improvement. Within the continuous improvement template, there are direct connections to the NEMTSS essential elements. In this first section, I will outline the essential elements and indicate the sections within the CIP template where school teams can tease out those elements. Within an NEMTSS, sound infrastructure and effective shared leadership are the foundation on which all the essential elements build. The school team's purpose is to ensure a strong school plan for NEMTSS and to facilitate school-wide implementation of that plan to ensure the success of every student. The overall function of school teams is to provide direction for the social, emotional, behavioral, and academic supports that are a part of a school's Tier 1 core practices. Within the CIP template, we have a space to document the school team's leadership structure, including team members' names, positions, and responsibilities. Collaboration and communication are essential to the functioning of any system of support, as multifaceted as NEMTSS. As such, it's important for school teams to ensure effective communication between staff about all aspects of the system and transparent communication about what is working, what is not working, and the adjustments underway will be critical to the success of a system. Within this table in the CIP template, each school team would record their MTSS communication plan in terms of types of communication that will be communicated, the frequency in which that information is communicated, the format of communication, and the team member responsible for the messaging. Since the function of school teams is to enhance learning opportunities for all students, there is focus on Tier 1 core support. As you will hear in other parts of this webinar series, Tier 2 targeted and Tier 3 intensified supports are focused on within the functions of other teams. In the problem-solving and continuous improvement process, school teams will want to consider both student and adult data. This data can come from multiple sources. These sources can include student learning and well-being, student and adult perceptual data, student demographics, and process data. These sources of data will help a team understand a school's impact on student achievement. As we look more in depth at the 4 major sources of data, this chart gives us a little bit more insight into the types of data that school teams can use to problem solve and make decisions. The most accessible data is student learning and well-being data, such as standardized tests, norm or criterion reference tests, teacher observations of abilities, and authentic assessment. As a result, it's easy to point out where our data is abnormal as it applies to student achievement. However, to thoroughly address an issue, it's important that school teams ensure that they are adjusting for the root cause, not just the symptoms. So for that purpose, school teams might look at demographic data, such as enrollment, attendance, dropout rate, gender, grade level. For example, if the data for an entire grade level is an outlier, we know that our focus should point towards that grade level. School teams might also look at perceptual data, such as perceptions of the learning environment, values and beliefs, attitudes, and observations. Decades of research has indicated that students don't learn from people that they don't like and in places where they don't feel safe or a sense of belonging. Finally, school teams might look at school process data. Examples of this type of data include fidelity to instructional materials and practices, needs assessment, and gap analysis. School teams engage in a problem-solving process to drive continuous improvement and make data-based decisions about Tier 1 core instruction. Teams use the information generated from the balanced assessment system to support data-based decisions through the problem-solving process. While teams may vary their language and approach, the Nebraska MTSS problem-solving model guides teams around a 5-step problem-solving process. These 5 steps are all important. They are not linear, and leadership might go back and forth between steps as needed. When school teams engage in the problem-solving process, the first step is to identify what is occurring. Teams will analyze multiple sources of data to identify the difference between the desired outcome and the actual performance for academic, behavioral, social, and emotional outcomes for all students. The key step in the identify stage is to ensure teams are reviewing multiple sources of school-wide data. After reviewing multiple sources of data, school teams can start to identify factual data points. In this stage, it's important to avoid making inferences about the data and to focus on listing facts, areas of strength and areas of growth observed within the data. When a team has compiled adequate data points, strengths and growth areas, and a gap area or issue emerges, the next step is to create a precise problem statement. As a reminder, a precise problem statement is a way to describe the problem to be solved in simple terms. It is typically focused on student learning and informed by multiple data sources. In the second step, school teams will analyze why the issue or problem is occurring. School teams will consider systemic concerns, barriers, patterns, and trends. They will identify content area and grade level concerns for the whole child, and they will determine root causes. During this stage, school teams will want to determine if there is any data missing and begin to identify patterns and trends in the data. It's important that during this stage, the school team is making connections they are seeing between the different data sets. As a review, the indicator for Tier 1 course success is when approximately 75 to 80% of students are reaching benchmark criteria in any given content area. The focus of the school team is to identify root causes within Tier 1 core. Also, as a review, root cause analysis serves as a technique that helps guide teams to discover and understand the initiating or causes of a problem. The goal is to determine missing or inadequately applied controls that will prevent recurrence. The problems are gaps between the goal and the actual performance data. In root cause analysis, it's important that school teams examine systems below the surface that are actually bringing about or causing the problem. This information serves as a reminder about the importance of root cause analysis and the indicators of when root cause is ultimately reached. An effective root cause analysis process is the 5 whys method. This process will involve asking the question why 5 times to identify the root cause of a problem. Each answer forms the basis for the next question, forming a chain of cause and effect that gradually gets closer from the root cause. In the third step, school teams create a plan as part of their decision-making process. In this step, it is important to outline the specific goal and expected outcome. It is also important to outline the support needed in order to achieve effective implementation. Before school teams engage in action planning, it is essential that a priority outcome and implementation goal are created. A priority outcome relates to the specific changes in experience and knowledge, skills and behavior for students or adults. Implementation goals relate to development of structures and processes that will support a school's work in order to make it possible to achieve the outcomes for students and adults. In the fourth step of the problem-solving process, the focus shifts to the implementation of a Tier 1 core support plan. The plan focuses on what to teach, how best to teach it, and how to monitor progress in the area of whole child learning. Before implementation occurs, specifics such as the who, what, when, where, and how must be identified and clearly documented to ensure the plan is implemented with fidelity. The school team will also identify students with active plans to make sure those plans are considered, whether that is for tiered interventions, a 504, an IEP, high ability learners, multilingual learners, or any other relevant plan. In the CIP template, it's important for school teams to record the following information in regards to action planning. High leverage action steps using evidence-based practices in addition to Tier 1 core. The staff responsible for those actions, the support, resources, or professional learning needed for implementation, and a specific timeline that these actions will be executed. It is also important for school teams to consider these and the following steps: the data sources that would be used to determine growth and the criteria for successful implementation. The CIP template has an additional section where school teams can record more specific information regarding professional development. In this section, school teams can specify the priority area or goal connected to the professional development, the topic of learning, the staff who are targeted for learning, the persons responsible for the delivery of professional development, resources needed, and the timeline associated with professional learning. Following implementation of the plan, school teams will then engage in regularly and timely reflection. In this phase, school teams will reflect on what did and did not work. The intention of this reflection is to determine the effectiveness of the implemented plan and to adjust as needed. This step will involve progress monitoring the plan at appropriate intervals. Data will need to be analyzed and determine effectiveness and next steps. After reflecting, the team may choose to modify the plan or to return to the first step to identify and begin the cycle again. Within the reflection steps, there are a few essential actions that school teams can take to ensure implementation fidelity. Pre-plan specific dates and times where the plan and data will be reviewed. Collect multiple data for review. Select and implement a data protocol and decision-making process. Evaluate the response for all students and student groups. Was it good? Was it questionable? Or was it a poor response? Did the data match or come close to the success criteria? And then teams can also maintain, make adjustments, or abandon practices. As a review, through this webinar, we have provided an example of how a school leadership team uses the CIP template. We have identified the presence of each MTSS essential element at the school level within the CIP template. And we have utilized a problem-solving model at the school level to create or refine goals for continuous improvement. Greetings, my name is Kayla Payton. I am the MTSS Regional Support Lead for Region 2. For this chapter, we will focus on the following objectives as they relate to scheduling within a multi-tiered system of support. We will review strategies for designing an effective and equitable master schedule. We will examine how to provide structured, dedicated, and protected time for collaboration, problem solving, and professional learning. We will also explore scheduling strategies to secure time for interventions and enrichment. Without a strong infrastructure and effective shared leadership, it is not possible to design a strong, layered continuum of support, engage in sound database decision-making, or support communication and collaboration. So an essential piece of building a sound infrastructure is the design of a master schedule. The master schedule truly does reveal the beliefs, attitudes, values, and priorities of a school. Students' needs should be a key factor in the design of a master schedule. The master schedule will look a little different in each district and even between different school buildings in a district. It's critical that school leaders take the time to review and analyze data, which will be the basis of determining master schedule. As difficult as a task as it may be, educators can't allow the master schedule to be a barrier to meeting the unique needs of students. When considering the design of the schedule, here are some indicators of effective master schedules. They ensure that every student has access to Tier 1 core curriculum and supports in the least restrictive environment. They prioritize and protect time for collaborative and student support teams to engage in database decision-making. An effective master schedule includes secured time to provide students with additional supports when Tier 1 core supports alone are not meeting their whole child needs. In addition, an effective master schedule includes protected time for district and school teams to drive continuous improvement. Some considerations that should be made when designing the master schedule are as follows. Ensuring the schedule is meeting the state and district guidelines for instructional minutes, including the required time for specific content areas. Identifying and aligning with the school's goals and priorities. Considerations for different class sizes, teacher experience, and student needs for diversity, and determining age-appropriate timing of core classes and intensified supports. When looking to reinvent or modify the master schedule to ensure equity, a few activities might include prioritizing students with the greatest needs, performing an audit of school schedules across the district or state, gathering feedback from staff on schedule changes, and protecting time for teams to collaborate, problem solve, engage in professional learning, and drive continuous improvement, as well as prioritizing time to provide tiered supports to meet students' needs. A second essential piece of building a sound infrastructure with the master schedule is the ability to secure time in the already established schedule for teachers and educational leaders to engage in collaboration, problem solving, and professional learning. Two main components to consider when scheduling for collaboration are a district's teaming structure, as well as the processes, norms, and routines that each of those teams have. Teams need structured, dedicated, and protected time to meet, This should be scheduled in advance as part of the school calendar, while teams will develop their own cadence and while more frequent meetings may be needed when building the system. Teams typically need to meet on a regular basis to support database decision-making. There are two main decisions points as guidance from the NDE's Elementary Instructional Planning Guide. Those are decision point 1, determine the makeup, duration, and frequency of team meetings. And decision point 2, find time to embed learning and collaboration within the school day. Within decision point 1, those who schedule for collaboration meetings should consider the following functions and time goals of each type of team or individual teacher. The full chart that you see in this slide can be found in the NDE's Elementary Instructional Planning Guide. When scheduling for collaboration and professional learning, school leaders and teams should consider teachers' experiences at the core by focusing on the following. Ensuring time for collaboration is structured, dedicated, and protected. Centering professional learning on supporting implementation of instructional materials. Listening to teachers' requests for different types of professional learning. And considering how to include English learner, special education, and specials teachers in grade level planning. Without enough time in the schedule, the structures and systems that we have built could potentially collapse. When schedule modification is unlikely, or when trying to find time needs to get creative, we can consider some of these ideas from education resource strategies. Some of the strategies suggested include stacking blocks back to back, banking time, increasing the availability at time of the end of the day or beginning of the day, collaborating during recess and lunch or lunch, creating enrichment periods covered by other adults to allow teachers to collaborate. When strategic collaboration and professional learning is embedded into the master schedule, teachers can learn and grow while improving their practice. Teacher collaboration and professional learning enables proper implementation of any MTSS, evidence-based practices, and HQIM, quality Tier 1 instruction, targeted interventions, and inclusive teaching practices. The third essential piece of building a sound infrastructure within the master schedule is scheduling for interventions. It is important to secure and protect additional time for students when Tier 1 core supports alone are not meeting the whole child needs. If this isn't a common practice for you, here are a few nuggets of information to compel you to start this evidence-based practice. Intervention and enrichment, either as small group or individualized, allows educators to respond to students' academic and non-academic needs in targeted ways. Incorporating intervention into the master schedule, one way or another, is the most systematic way to ensure that both teachers and students are available for additional supports. And providing additional time for supports is essential because Tier 2 targeted and Tier 3 intensified supports are provided in addition to Tier 1 core supports, which all students should have access to. When scheduling for interventions, it's important that educational leaders utilize a model that suits the context, capacity, and needs of the students and instructional staff in the building or district. Some considerations for this step may include knowledge and availability of well-trained staff, access to evidence-based practices and supports, considering different structures that suit student and staff needs, such as lateral interventions, which is when an intervention block occurs simultaneously within a single grade. Vertical intervention is when intervention blocks are staggered across a grade level. And then examining the existing intervention process, procedures, expectations, and documentation system. Within the secondary schedule, advisory time is an example of a lateral intervention structure. Students can receive academic, behavioral, or social emotional interventions 1 to 2 times a week during advisory. When school leaders are thinking about ways to build in time for explicit interventions in the master schedule, they can also consider a lateral intervention structure, where interventions could occur at different times or different periods. When scheduling for interventions or when leaders are struggling to find time to provide interventions, the following strategies can be considered. scheduling focus at areas such as reading and math at staggered times throughout multiple grade levels, reducing a small amount of time from other blocks to create a new block, reducing non-instructional time that is currently not well aligned to HQIM and district goals and priorities, or using existing time and spaces to build skills, implement social, emotional, behavioral, and academic supports. The listed websites contain great scheduling tools with examples and strategies, considerations for issues, common problem areas, and reflections when building time into a master schedule for interventions, collaboration, and professional learning. As a review, this webinar covered the following objectives. We reviewed strategies for designing an effective and equitable master schedule. We examined how to provide structured, dedicated, and protected time for collaboration, problem solving, and professional learning. And we explored scheduling strategies to secure time for interventions and enrichment. Thank you.
Now move on to database decision-making at the collaborative team level. My name is Emily Arkfeld, and I am the Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Learning Specialist serving Region 2 with Nebraska MTSS. For this chapter, we will focus on the following objectives as they relate to database decision-making at the collaborative team level. Review teaming structure and functions of collaborative teams, introduce and define database individualization, and review the steps of the collaborative team problem-solving model with sample template. To view a webinar on database decision-making at the PK-12 district, community, school, or student level, and/or family involvement and engagement or scheduling, please click on the respective chapter tab. We will start by reviewing teaming structures and functions. The strength of Nebraska MTSS comes from effectively engaging a variety of voices and perspectives to identify and support student needs. To do that, teams need to be set up effectively and able to work together. Through a multi-tier system of support, teams are established to analyze data, identify strengths and areas for improvement, and develop an action plan for growth. Depending largely on the district size, collaborative teams are structured differently and focus on Tier 1 core and Tier 2 targeted supports, or collaborative teams may need to bridge both purposes. Having diverse representation is essential to the makeup of this team. These teams may be considered PLCs, grade level teams, and/or content area teams. Collaborative teams should be made up of a combination of general and special education teachers, specialists, including counselors or social workers, school psychologists, mental health practitioners, speech and language pathologists, instructional coaches, etc., and always making sure to include your paraprofessionals. In addition to their diverse roles within the school system, the collaborative team members should include educators with a focus on instructional excellence in core content areas, social, emotional, and behavioral well-being, physical well-being, student safety, a positive and inclusive culture and climate, special education, high ability learners, English learners, as well as other areas that support post-high school options. The purpose of collaborative teams is to ensure all students in a given grade, classroom, or multiple grade band levels have access to strong Tier 1 core supports. The collaborative team also begins to use data to make database decisions about Tier 2 targeted supports to respond to student needs. At Tier 1, the function of collaborative teams is to analyze Tier 1 core supports from the classroom and use grade band data to adjust teaching and learning, and to use data to support planning for Tier 1 core supports. At Tier 2, the function of the collaborative teams is to use data to identify students in need of Tier 2 targeted interventions and determine support plans, use data to monitor the success of Tier 2 targeted supports, and ensure resource allocation is considered and decided based on data. It is suggested that collaborative teams meet weekly or bi-weekly to determine student movement within the tiers of intervention. Moving on now to data-based individualization. According to the National Center on Intensive Intervention, data-based individualization, or DBI, is a research-based process for individualizing and intensifying interventions through the systematic use of assessment data, validated interventions, and research-based adaptation strategies. DBI is a process. It is not a specific program or a product. The process is driven by data, characterized by increased intensity and individualization, and considers the academic and behavioral needs of the student. In some schools, intensive intervention may be known as a Tier 3 intervention and may be embedded within a multi-tiered system of support framework. The definition on the screen lets us know also that DBI is the technical term for what many good teachers do naturally through problem-solving process. They frequently review student data and they make changes to their teaching based on what works for students. DBI, however, makes this process systematic, explicit, and tailored to meet the individual needs of students through that multi-step process that gradually intensifies instruction and support. When we're thinking about what students might need DBI, we're looking at students perhaps who are not making adequate progress in their current program. This includes students who are not meeting benchmark after Tier 1 core instruction and supports, and students who are not making progress after receiving Tier 2 targeted supports and interventions. We also are looking at students that are not making progress after receiving Tier 3 intensified supports and interventions. It may also include those students who are above grade level benchmarks and those that are considered high ability learners and are not meeting their expected growth targets. This is a group that is typically overlooked. We also want to consider students who have persistently low academic achievement or high intensity or high frequency behaviors. When talking about Tier 2 targeted supports in terms of the DBI flowchart, this is the first step when a student is not making adequate progress or has consistent academic or behavioral concerns. Teams must first apply a validated intervention program. As noted in the flowchart, Tier 2 targeted supports are standard protocol. This means they are quickly applied and not individualized for the students receiving them. The team would then monitor the student's progress and determine the next step based on whether they were responsive or non-responsive. If responsive, the team would continue the intervention or support and eventually make a plan to fade out supports once a student has reached their goals. Dive into the problem-solving model now as it relates to our collaborative team level. Teams engage in a problem-solving model to drive continuous improvement and make database decisions about student support. Students are not the subject of problem solving. The supports that are provided or not provided to students by the adults are the focus of the problem solving. Teams use the information generated from the balanced assessment system to support database decisions through the problem solving process. While teams may vary their language or their approach, this framework guides teams around a 5-step process. The focus for the collaborative team is: how can we improve our instruction to support better outcomes for all students? Which students need Tier 2 targeted support, and what should be the focus of that support? At the collaborative team level, the purpose of the identify step is to determine the measurable difference between the desired outcome and the actual student performance for academic, behavioral, social, and emotional outcomes, to identify improvements needed in Tier 1 core supports and students in need of Tier 2 targeted supports. When we think about our guiding questions and our key steps, we want to ask ourselves, what is the goal? What is the actual student performance? And what is the difference between the goal and the actual student performance? And then for students who did not meet or are above proficiency levels on whole child data, we want to make sure we're reviewing attendance, office referral, out of school suspension, and in-school suspension data for those students, any other risk factor data, review other benchmark data, including formative assessments, and prior education history and health information, and check for any other support plans to ensure consistency. A collaborative team will have varied data sources to turn to as they move through the decision-making process. According to Bernhardt, multiple measures of data would include demographics, which includes enrollment, attendance, dropout rate, ethnicity, gender, grade level, perception, so the perceptions of learning, perceptions of the environment, their values and beliefs, and their attitudes and observations. The school processes, so what is the description of school programs and processes, and then the student learning, looking at standardized tests, norm, criterion reference tests, teacher observations of abilities, authentic assessments, and these sources will all help collaborative teams understand a school's impact on student achievement. Collaborative teams will want to consider both student and adult data in their decision-making process. As we've talked about, student and adult data can come from multiple sources. These sources include student learning and well-being, student and adult perceptual data, student demographics, and process data. And when analyzing data, collaborative teams also need to be analyzing with a critical lens to make sure that students from each demographic group are achieving similarly to their peers in other demographic groups. As an example, collaborative teams can ask, are students that are identified as needing special education support achieving similarly to their peers that do not qualify for special education support? By tracking certain data systems, which you have heard called early warning indicators, it is possible to identify when students are beginning to fall off track, providing time to intervene and alter their trajectory to keep students on the pathway to graduation. It also provides valuable data on ways schools and classrooms are or are not working for student groups so that they can action plan at all 3 tiers. As you can see on the slide, data systems use validated indicators to identify at-risk students, and that helps target interventions and supports to help students achieve success, and it can reduce the % of students considered at risk when used with fidelity. In our data systems, we want to include these 3 indicators that are highly predictive of a student's likelihood of dropping out of school or not graduating in 4 years: attendance, behavior and suspension, and course performance and proficiency. Here's an example of decision rules from the Nebraska Department of Education MTSS Continuous Improvement Plan template. Please note this is an example of indicators to provide some guidance. These need to be decided locally to ensure the needs of students within each district are being met. For example, the dates to review can potentially be quarterly as shown, but many times districts might need to set this up monthly or bi-weekly depending on their local data or needs. During this identify step of the problem-solving model, your team will want to turn your reflections into precise problem statements. A precise problem statement is a way to describe the problem you are trying to solve in simple terms. It is typically focused on student learning and informed by multiple data sources. At the collaborative team level, the purpose of the analyze step is to inform improvements to instruction, curriculum, and environment to best support the learner using the whole child assessment, observational, and perceptual data. Here we form a plan to meet the needs of some students, which should have a positive impact or no impact on other students. For our guiding questions and key steps, when we're looking at Tier 1 core supports, we might want to know what trends and outcomes help illuminate where instruction could have been stronger. How can we adjust instruction to support those learning needs in planned instruction? And what professional learning do we need to support this change? We're looking at the Tier 2 targeted supports. We want to compare the screening results with other data sources to confirm the need for additional support. Determine diagnostic assessments needed to hone in on the skills that need targeted support and making sure we're involving family members and caregivers in understanding needs. As stated on the last slide, one of the key steps during the analyze step of the problem-solving model is for the team to determine if additional assessments are needed to identify what the student can do in relation to the expectations and what the student still needs to work on. Here's a brief list of a variety of assessments that can be used to gather additional data. For a more in-depth look at the different types of assessment, their usage, and examples, please refer to Appendix B in the MTSS Framework document. After the team has reviewed the data to identify and analyze the problem, they will work together to create a plan of interventions and supports that the adults will put in place to address the problem. They will also need to develop their plan for progress monitoring. Looking at our guiding questions, we also want to make sure that we are communicating the support plan with personnel and teachers so that everyone is on the same page. While creating the plan, the team will need to determine whether the work needs to return to Tier 1 to improve the core for all students, or if it will be a targeted approach for some students. They will need to identify what personnel will be involved and what the intervention will be, including its frequency and duration. Here's an example of a Tier 2 collaborative team agenda where they can identify new students needing targeted supports and in what areas, document the data for analysis, and lay out their plan for implementation. During implementation, the identified personnel will implement the interventions and supports and track process, procedures, and progress for the team to use for reflection. Here are a few reminders from Designing and Delivering Intensive Interventions, a Teacher's Toolkit. When deciding group size, ensure that it is optimal for learning and will allow for ample opportunities for students to respond and practice. It is also important to adhere to a consistent schedule and determine a length and frequency that can realistically support the learner in achieving their goal and ultimately reaching grade level benchmarks. We also want to deliver the intervention using explicit instruction and give immediate feedback. For more information on explicit instruction and feedback, please see our Evidence-Based Strategies webinar series linked in the slide deck and available in our media library. During the Reflect step, the team will review the current data, including progress monitoring to look for progress made. They will work together to determine next steps, including whether to exit, fade, continue, or intensify the intervention. They will also need to identify what information needs to be shared outside of the team and to whom. Here again are tables from the Tier 2 collaborative team agenda example. In these examples, you can see they are broken up into two areas: literacy support and social, emotional, and behavioral learning. They have the intervention listed along with the student names that are receiving the intervention, the progress monitoring status, and support actions based on the progress monitoring, and fidelity, measure, data, and actions. We have now discussed how to utilize the Nebraska MTSS problem-solving model in collaborative teams at both Tier 1 and Tier 2. To view a webinar on database decision-making at PK-12 district, community, school, or student level, and/or family involvement and engagement for scheduling, please click on the respective chapter tab. Now move on to database decision-making at the student team level. My name is Emily Arkfeld, and I am the Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Learning Specialist serving Region 2 with Nebraska MTSS. For this chapter, we will focus on the following objectives as they relate to database decision-making at the student team level. Review teaming structure and functions of student teams, introduce and define database individualization, and review the steps of the student team problem-solving model with sample template. To view a webinar on database decision-making at the PK-12 district, community, school, or collaborative level, and/or family involvement and engagement or scheduling, please click on the respective chapter tab. We will first review teaming structures and functions. As you can see through this teaming structures visual, it is designed to engage a variety of voices and perspectives to identify and support student needs. To do this, teams are set up so that they are able to effectively work together to analyze data, identify strengths, areas for improvement, and develop an action plan for growth. You will see representation on the teams are shared, creating opportunities for two-way communication and collaboration. The student support team is made up of those educators directly involved with the student, such as family members and caregivers, and members of the school support team. For example, school psychologists, school counselors, speech-language pathologists, mental health practitioners, social worker, and a high-ability learner specialist if the student is considered twice exceptional. Team membership will look different based on the unique needs of each student. The student support team purpose is to focus on the individualized support of a student or students through regular reviews of progress monitoring data, which leads to adjusting interventions to meet the dynamic needs of the student. A student support team has multiple functions. The first function is to drive Tier 3 intensified social, emotional, behavioral, and academic supports for an individual student. These supports can include ensuring implementation of effective Tier 1 core and Tier 2 targeted supports are happening for the individual student, install wraparound services, a functional behavioral assessment or an FBA, or a behavior intervention plan, also called a BIP, a referral to community resources who can provide goods or services that can help support the family, including meals, transportation, or family stability classes. Tier 3 intensified supports should address skill gaps or promote acceleration and enable successful mastery while ensuring the prevention of new content area gaps and supporting student engagement. This is not to delay a referral if a student is suspected of having a disability. Along with driving Tier 3 intensified supports, The student support team also has responsibility for monitoring student progress, engaging family members and caregivers in developing the student support plan, working to ensure that other student or family identified supports are provided, communicating regularly with family members and caregivers regarding their students to coordinate support while also understanding their perspective on the student progress, and ensuring resource allocation is considered and decided based on data. Moving now to data-based individualization. According to the National Center on Intensive Intervention, data-based individualization, or DBI, is a research-based process for individualizing and intensifying interventions through the systematic use of assessment data, validated interventions, and research-based adaptation strategies. DBI is a process. It is not a specific program or product. The process is driven by data, characterized by increased intensity and individualization, and considers the academic and behavioral needs of the student. In some schools, intensive intervention may be known as Tier 3 intervention and may be embedded within a multi-tiered system of support framework, which is what we are talking about today. DBI is a technical term for what many good teachers do naturally through the problem-solving process. Frequently review student data and make changes to their teaching based on what works for students. DBI, however, makes this process systematic, explicit, and tailored to meet the needs of individual students through a multi-step process that gradually intensifies instruction and support. When thinking about what students might benefit from DBI, we will look first at any student who is not making adequate progress in their current program. This includes students not meeting benchmark after Tier 1 core instruction and supports, Tier 2 targeted supports and interventions, or Tier 3 intensified supports and interventions. This also includes students who are above grade level benchmarks and those who are considered high ability learners who might not be meeting their expected growth targets. This is generally a group that is typically overlooked. We also want to consider students who have persistently low academic achievement or high intensity or high frequency behaviors. When talking about Tier 3 intensified supports in terms of the DBI flowchart, we first have to note what happened after the Tier 2 targeted support or intervention. The team would monitor the student's progress and determine the next step based on if they were responsive or non-responsive. If responsive, the team would continue the intervention or support and eventually make a plan to fade out supports once the student has reached their goals. If the student is non-responsive, the next step may be to collect some diagnostic data to pinpoint specific learning needs that hone in on skills. Diagnostics give us much more information than just a screener. After that, the student support team would identify an intervention adaptation that best meets the student's unique, individualized needs. Intervention adaptations can include things like changing frequency, duration, or group size or location. It may also include altering the way the content is delivered or opportunities to respond. Moving now into the problem-solving model for student support level teams. Teams engage in a problem-solving model to drive continuous improvement and make data-based decisions about student support. Students are not the subject of problem-solving. The supports that are provided or not provided to students by the adults are the focus of the problem-solving. Teams use the information generated from the balanced assessment system to support data-based decisions through the problem-solving process. While teams may vary their language and approach, this framework guides teams around a 5-step process. The focus for student support teams is: how can we improve our instruction to support students who are in need of Tier 3 intensified support, and what should that support focus on? Are Tier 3 intensified supports designed to increase student outcomes on achievement measures, attendance, and the pathway to graduation? A student team problem-solving model is detailed in Appendix C of the Nebraska MTSS Framework document. When looking at the identify step at the student support level teams, the purpose is to determine the measurable difference between the desired outcome and the actual student performance for academic, behavioral, social, and emotional learning outcomes for a specific student. When we are looking at our guiding questions and our key steps, for students who did not respond to the combination of strong Tier 1 core instruction and Tier 2 targeted supports, we want to look at what specific support might be needed, what has worked before, what has not worked, and we'll want to review other data, including risk factor data such as attendance, office referrals, out-of-school suspensions, in-school suspensions, benchmark data, formative assessments, and prior educational history and health information. A student support team will have many data sources to turn to as they move through the decision-making process. According to Bernhardt, multiple measures of data would include demographics, perceptions, school processes, and student learning. And when these sources of data intersect, a student support team can determine the best actions, processes, and programs to best meet the learning needs of the student. Student support teams will also want to consider student data that can come from a variety of sources. These sources include student learning and well-being, student perceptual data, student demographics, and process data. Student demographic data includes categories such as race and ethnicity, special education, English learners and high ability learners, free and reduced and highly mobile, and attendance and graduation rates. For more information on different categories and sources of data, please see Appendix B in the MTSS Framework document. During this identify step of the problem-solving model, your team will want to turn your reflections into a precise problem statement. A precise problem statement is a way to describe the problem you are trying to solve in simple terms. It is typically focused on student learning and informed by multiple data sources. To give an assets-based approach to student support, we are providing an example of how the problem-solving model can be utilized to create a student success plan to address specific needs of students. During the identify step, we want to gather and document all of the data to help guide our conversations. This screenshot highlights the importance of including student strengths, engagement and involvement, and staff input. Here are 2 more screenshots from the example student plan. Because we know that social, emotional, and academic success is all tied together, this helps illustrate the whole child lens we want to use when examining data. Please note, these are just examples of the assessments to use. Districts need to make sure they examine their balanced assessment system to determine local needs, of which those would be reflected in a student success plan. Here at the analyze level, we are using whole child assessment, environmental, physical, observational, and perceptual data to determine specific areas of need and determine what factors might be contributing to a student not meeting proficiency levels and not responding to previous interventions, or a high ability learner far exceeding proficiency levels yet not responding to previous interventions. We will want to compare screening results with other data sources to confirm or disconfirm the need for additional support. We'll need to determine additional diagnostic assessments needed to hone in on the skills that need targeted support. We will determine why and under what circumstances the student is not meeting proficiency. We will look at what conditions are needed for the student's learning to be enabled and what intervention strategies and support are needed to support the student. We also want to ensure that we are using student, family, and caregiver perspectives, as they can be particularly important in this step. We might also look at and rely on our decision rules that we have in place. Decision rules help teams make standardized decisions about which student should receive an intervention and which intervention they will receive, how frequently to progress monitor students receiving interventions, when to review progress monitoring data, whether to continue, intensify, or fade the support or intervention, when to refer a student for a special education evaluation, and establish a plan for parent and caregiver communication. Decision rules should be reviewed and refined at least annually. It is also important to note that if they are meeting the decision rules, it doesn't necessarily mean they will automatically be put into an intervention. And vice versa, if they don't meet criteria, they could still receive intervention through nomination. Here is what the analyze section of a student success plan might look like, during which you would use the information gathered during the identify and analyze steps to narrow your focus to 1 or 2 focus or priority areas. After the team has reviewed the data to identify and analyze the problem, they will work together to create a plan of interventions and supports that the adults will put in place to address the problem. They will also need to develop their plan for progress monitoring. During implementation, the identified personnel will implement the interventions and supports and track process, procedures, and progress for the team to use for reflection. Using the guided questions and key steps from the plan and implement steps, the student support team will create and document the individualized plan for the focus or priority area identified for the student. We move now to the reflect step of the problem-solving model, in which we determine the effectiveness of the implemented plan and determine next steps. Looking again at our example plan, during the reflect step, we would be progress monitoring by looking at the rate of improvement by comparing our baseline data to our current data. Here, we want to make sure that we are including intervention program assessments, intervention attendance, behavior data, and any observational data. We then rate the progress as positive, questionable, or poor. If positive, we decide whether to continue or fade, and if questionable or poor, we look at an intervention adaptation. As discussed earlier in this webinar, while student voice and family and community communication and collaboration are important at all levels, it is especially vital at the student level. We need to ensure that each student, regardless of age, is a part of the process identifying their needs and evaluating successes. We also need to have ongoing, open, two-way communication with family and caregivers and involve any community providers and partners as necessary. To conclude, in the final chapter of this webinar, we have now discussed how to utilize the NEMTSS problem-solving model at the student team level for implementation of evidence-based intensified supports to match the student's individual needs. Thank you for joining this webinar, The Road to Continuous Improvement, Sustaining an MTSS Framework, Part 3, Organizational Drivers for Database Decision-Making. If you have any further questions as to how the NEMTSS team can assist you, please visit our website at nemtss.unl.edu or click on the link in the slide deck to find the information needed to contact your regional support lead. Thank you again for joining us.